The moment I discovered the truth, the world around me shattered into a million pieces. It was a Tuesday evening when I walked through the front door, the familiar creak of the hinges echoing in the silence of our home. I expected to find her there, waiting for me with a smile, maybe even dinner simmering on the stove. Instead, I found an empty house, and the quiet felt oppressive. My heart raced as I noticed her phone lying on the kitchen counter, screen lit up with a message that would change everything. Can't wait to see you tonight. Just you and me like old times. Derek, the funeral home director. My mind raced as I processed the implications. I had always thought of him as a professional, someone who handled death with dignity and respect. I never imagined he would be the one to bring death to my marriage. My stomach twisted into knots, and I felt the weight of betrayal crushing me. I picked up the phone, my hands trembling, and read through the rest of the messages. Each one was a dagger, each word a reminder of the betrayal I was about to confront. I could hear my heart pounding in my ears as I dialed her number. She answered on the second ring, her voice warm and inviting. "Hey babe, I was just thinking about you." There was a lightness to her tone, an innocence that felt maddeningly out of place. "I'm on my way home. Want me to pick up something for dinner?" Dinner. I couldn't help the bitterness that seeped into my voice. "Is that what you're thinking about right now? Or is it Derek?" Silence. The kind that stretches uncomfortably, filled with the weight of unspoken truths. "What are you talking about?" she finally asked, but I could hear the tremor in her voice. "I found your messages. I know about the affair." My words hung in the air like a death sentence. "Wait, I can explain." "Explain what?" I interrupted, my voice rising. "How you've been sleeping with him, how you've been lying to me." Her response was a flurry of excuses, but all I could focus on was the betrayal that coursed through my veins, igniting a rage I didn't know I possessed. I felt like a fool, a man who had built a life based on trust and love only to find it crumbling beneath me. The memories of our early days together, laughter, shared dreams, and tender moments flashed through my mind, now tainted by her deception. "Just come home," she pleaded. "We can talk about this." I hung up, my heart racing and my head spinning. I was left standing in the kitchen, surrounded by the remnants of our life together. The smell of her perfume lingered in the air, a cruel reminder of the intimacy we once shared. I wanted to scream, to throw things, but instead I felt an icy calm wash over me. This wasn't just about betrayal, it was about revenge. As I stood there, the reality of my situation began to crystallize. I had to do something. I couldn't let her get away with this, and certainly not him. Derek, or whatever facade he presented to the world, needed to be exposed. I had no idea how I would do it yet, but the thought of taking down the man who had taken my wife was a flickering flame in my chest. It ignited a determination I never knew I had. I had no plan, no strategy, but I felt the gears of my mind starting to turn. I would not be the victim in this story. I would become the author of my own revenge, and I would ensure that Derek's business, built on the trust of grieving families, would suffer the consequences of his actions. In the days that followed my discovery, I found myself in a haze of confusion and rage. It was as if my life had been placed under a microscope, and every detail became magnified, twisted by the betrayal that now defined my existence. I couldn't look at my wife without feeling a surge of anger, nor could I bear the thought of Derek's smug face at the funeral home, where he had turned caring for the deceased into a facade for his own predatory desires. My wife, Lisa, was a woman of contradictions. On one hand, she was the love of my life, the woman I had married 5 years ago who had filled our home with laughter and warmth. She was intelligent, witty, and had a way of making even the most mundane days feel special. We had built a life together, filled with shared dreams of traveling the world and starting a family. But in the wake of her betrayal, I was left questioning everything I thought I knew about her. Derek, on the other hand, was a man I had only met a handful of times. He was tall, with a commanding presence that seemed to draw people in. He ran a successful funeral home in town, a business that had been in his family for generations. He was well respected, known for his professionalism and care in dealing with grieving families. But now I saw him through a different lens, one that revealed a man willing to exploit his position to seduce my wife. I recalled the first time I had met him. It was at a community event, a fundraiser for a local charity. He had been charming, engaging with everyone around him, and I had thought nothing of it when he had taken a moment to speak with Lisa. They seemed to share a laugh over something trivial, and I had brushed it off as nothing more than friendly banter. How naive I had been. Now I couldn't help but wonder how long this had been going on. Had it started as a simple conversation that spiraled into something more? Or had it been a calculated plan on Derek's part, a way to prey on my wife's vulnerabilities? The questions gnawed at me like a persistent itch, but I pushed them aside. I needed to focus on my plan for revenge. I began to gather information about Derek and his funeral home. I spent hours online, looking up public records, reviews, and any information I could find about his business practices. It turned out that the funeral home, while well regarded, had its share of complaints. There were whispers of unethical practices, of families feeling taken advantage of during their most vulnerable moments. It was a small town, and gossip spread like wildfire. I could use that to my advantage. I reached out to a few acquaintances who worked in the funeral industry. I posed as a concerned citizen, asking about Derek and his reputation. The responses were mixed. Some praised his professionalism, while others hinted at darker dealings. I took notes, piecing together a picture of a man who, despite his polished exterior, had skeletons in his closet. As I delved deeper, I learned of a recent incident where a family had accused Derek of mishandling a loved one's remains. The case had been quietly settled, but the whispers remained. This was my opening. I would expose him, but not just for the affair. I wanted to tarnish his reputation, to make sure that when people thought of Derek, they wouldn't just see a funeral director. They would see a man unworthy of trust. I began to formulate a plan. I would leak information to local news outlets, reveal the complaints and the accusations that had been brushed under the rug. I envisioned a series of articles detailing his unethical practices, painting him as a predatory figure in a profession that thrived on trust. I would make sure that families would think twice before entrusting their loved ones to him. There was a thrill in the planning, a rush of adrenaline that coursed through me as I imagined the fallout from my actions. But with that thrill came a creeping sense of guilt. Was I going too far? Was I becoming the villain in this story? I struggled with the moral implications of my plan, but the anger I felt towards Lisa and Derek drowned out any hesitation. They had taken everything from me, and now it was my turn to take something back. I spent sleepless nights crafting my strategy, balancing the thrill of revenge with the gnawing doubt in the back of my mind. I knew I was crossing a line, but the thought of watching Derek's world crumble brought me a sense of purpose. I was no longer just the betrayed husband. I was a man on a mission. As I prepared to set my plan into motion, I felt a mixture of excitement and dread. The stakes were high, and I knew I had to be careful. One wrong move could blow up in my face, but the thought of letting Derek continue his charade while he was with my wife was unbearable. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come. This was just the beginning. The days turned into a blur as I meticulously plotted my revenge against Derek. My mind raced with ideas, and I found myself consumed by thoughts of betrayal, deceit, and the thrill of revenge. Each time I saw Lisa, I felt a wave of anger wash over me, but I masked it with forced smiles and a facade of normalcy. I had to play my part until the time was right. I began to dig deeper into the funeral home's operations, visiting the place under the guise of needing their services for a distant relative. The building was unassuming, with a quaint exterior that belied the darkness I was preparing to expose. Inside, it smelled of polished wood and flowers, sweet and deceptive. Derek greeted me with that same charming smile, his demeanor warm and inviting. I wanted to recoil at the sight of him, but instead I forced myself to engage. "Welcome, how can I assist you today?" he asked, his voice smooth as silk. I feigned interest in their offerings while my heart raced with the knowledge of what I was about to do. I scanned the room, taking in the framed certificates on the walls, the pictures of satisfied families, and the polished caskets that glistened under the soft lighting. It was a facade, and I was determined to tear it down. "Just gathering information for now," I replied, forcing a smile. "I'm not in a hurry, just exploring my options." As we chatted, I noted the way he interacted with his staff, demanding yet charismatic, a man used to getting his way. I could see the power he wielded, not just over the deceased but over the grieving families who relied on him during their darkest moments. It made my blood boil. After our meeting, I left the funeral home with a growing sense of purpose. I started to compile a dossier of information, piecing together complaints and incidents that painted Derek in a less than flattering light. I was becoming an investigator in my own right, and the thrill of unearthing secrets was intoxicating. One night I sat at my kitchen table, surrounded by printouts of reviews, articles, and notes from my conversations with acquaintances in the industry. I felt like a detective, connecting the dots of Derek's shady practices. I had discovered that he had been fined for mishandling bodies in the past, but the details had been buried deep, hidden from the public eye. This was the information I needed to expose him. As I crafted my plan, I felt a mix of exhilaration and dread. I reached out to a local journalist known for covering scandals, someone who had a reputation for digging deep and exposing the truth. I introduced myself as a concerned citizen, someone who had information that could shed light on the unethical practices at Derek's funeral home. People deserve to know who they're trusting with their loved ones. I told the journalist over the phone, my heart pounding. I have documents and evidence that could change the narrative. The journalist was intrigued and agreed to meet. The moment we hung up, a wave of anxiety washed over me. What if I was caught? What if Derek found out it was me? But the thought of letting him continue his affair with Lisa while maintaining his facade was unbearable. I had to see this through. Our meeting was set for the following week at a small coffee shop on the outskirts of town. As I prepared, I couldn't shake the feeling of impending doom. I had crossed a line and there was no turning back. I had become a man driven by revenge, a dangerous place to be. On the day of the meeting, I arrived early, my palms sweaty as I sipped my coffee, scanning the room for any signs of danger. When the journalist arrived, I felt a flicker of hope. He was a middle-aged man with a scruffy beard and an air of determination. I quickly laid out my findings, detailing Derek's past, the complaints filed against him, and the recent incident that had been settled quietly. "This is solid," the journalist said, his eyes narrowing as he studied the documents. "If we can corroborate this information, we can run a story that will shake the community." I nodded, feeling a mixture of pride and dread. I just want people to know the truth. They deserve to feel safe during one of the most vulnerable times in their lives. As we discussed the details, I felt a sense of exhilaration. I was finally taking action. But alongside that was a gnawing guilt. Was I doing the right thing? Would my revenge come at too high a price? I pushed those thoughts aside, focusing instead on the satisfaction that was just within reach. The journalist promised to follow up and keep me updated, and as I left the coffee shop, a sense of purpose surged through me. I was no longer a passive victim. I was an agent of change, determined to expose the man who had betrayed not only my trust, but the trust of countless families. But as I walked back to my car, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was dancing on the edge of a precipice. The thrill of revenge mingled with the fear of consequences, and I wondered how far I was willing to go to make sure Derek paid for what he had done. The next few days passed in a blur, filled with anticipation and anxiety. I waited for the journalist to reach out, my heart pounding with every notification on my phone. I was preparing for battle, but in the back of my mind I wondered if I was prepared for the fallout. As I sat alone in our living room, I glanced at Lisa, who was oblivious to the storm brewing beneath the surface. She smiled at me, and for a moment I felt a pang of longing for the woman I had fallen in love with. But that feeling was quickly overshadowed by the anger that had taken root in my heart. I knew I had to stay focused. Derek was the target, but the emotional toll was becoming unbearable. I was losing sight of who I was in the midst of this war. I could let her distract me. I had to keep my eyes on the prize. With each passing moment, I felt the weight of my decision pressing down on me. Revenge was a double-edged sword, and I was about to plunge it into the heart of the man who had stolen my wife. The days turned into a tense waiting game, each moment dragging as I anticipated a call from the journalist. I had shared my secrets, and now it felt like I was teetering on the edge of a cliff, ready to dive into the abyss of revenge. I was engulfed in a storm of emotions, anger, betrayal, and the undeniable thrill of what was to come. When the call finally came, I nearly dropped my phone. "We're ready to go to press," the journalist said, his voice steady and professional. "I've corroborated the information you provided. We'll be running a piece tomorrow morning." A rush of adrenaline coursed through me. "What will it say?" I asked, my heart racing. "It'll detail Derek's past complaints, the recent settlement, and the general sentiment from families who felt wronged. We're framing it as an exposé on unethical practices in the funeral industry with a focus on the importance of trust during times of grief." I felt a thrill at the thought of Derek's carefully constructed world beginning to crumble. "This is going to change everything," I said, trying to suppress the elation that bubbled to the surface. "Just remember," the journalist cautioned, "once it's out there, there's no taking it back. Be prepared for the fallout." I nodded, though I felt a mix of excitement and dread. I had been preparing for this moment, but nothing could truly prepare me for the consequences. The thought of Lisa's reaction, of the chaos that would ensue, sent a shiver down my spine. But I was resolute. I had to see this through. That night I barely slept. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with possibilities. Would Derek retaliate? Would Lisa confront me? The uncertainty was both exhilarating and terrifying. I was a man on a mission, but I was also a husband caught in a web of betrayal and deceit. The next morning, I woke early, my heart pounding as I grabbed my phone to check the news. I had never felt so anxious, like I was waiting for the world to shift beneath my feet. When I finally saw the headline, a surge of satisfaction washed over me. "Local funeral director accused of unethical practices. Families speak out." The article detailed everything I had shared, painting Derek in a light that was far from flattering. I couldn't help but smile at the thought of families reading it, feeling validated and empowered to speak up about their own experiences. Derek's reputation was at stake, and I was the one who had pulled the strings. But as the day progressed, the initial thrill began to fade, replaced by a gnawing anxiety. I watched the news unfold, the article generating buzz in the community. Derek's funeral home received calls from concerned families, and I could only imagine the chaos that was erupting in his office. At home, Lisa was oblivious to the storm brewing. She went about her day, calling me during lunch to check in. "Hey, babe. How's your day going?" she asked, her voice bright and cheerful. "Busy," I replied, my heart racing. "Just a lot on my plate. Want to grab dinner later?" I hesitated, feeling the weight of my actions pressing down on me. "I can't tonight, got some things to take care of." "Okay, no worries, I'll see you later." As the evening approached, I felt a mix of dread and anticipation. I knew that Derek would be facing the consequences of my actions, but I also knew that Lisa would eventually find out the truth. I had been living a lie, and the thought of her discovering my role in this made my stomach churn. That night, I decided to check the funeral home's social media. The comments were pouring in, families sharing their own experiences, expressing outrage and disappointment. I felt a twisted sense of satisfaction as I read through the posts, but it was short-lived. The reality of what I had done began to sink in. Around midnight, my phone buzzed with an incoming call. It was the journalist. "You need to brace yourself," he said, his tone serious. "Derek is not taking this lying down. He's planning to fight back." "What do you mean?" I asked, my heart racing. "He's hired a lawyer and is preparing to issue a statement. He's going to try to discredit the article, and he's looking into who leaked the information." Panic washed over me. I had been so focused on my revenge that I hadn't considered the fallout. "What should I do?" "Stay low for now. If he comes after you, we'll figure something out, but you need to be cautious." I hung up, feeling a chill run down my spine. I had unleashed a beast and now I was trapped in its wake. I had to be careful. The stakes were higher than I had anticipated. The next day I arrived at work early, my mind racing with thoughts of Derek's retaliation. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that my life had become a game of cat and mouse. I kept my head down, trying to focus on my tasks, but the anxiety gnawed at me. When I returned home that evening, Lisa greeted me with a smile, but I could see the flicker of concern in her eyes. "Have you seen the news? It's all over town." "Yeah, I heard," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "People are really upset about Derek. They're saying he's been taking advantage of families." "For years." I nodded, forcing a smile. "It's a shame. Do you think he'll lose his business?" I felt a pang of guilt at her question. I couldn't tell her the truth, couldn't reveal my role in this unfolding drama. "I don't know. I hope not. People deserve to have someone they can trust during those times." As the days passed, the fallout from my actions rippled through the community. Derek's funeral home faced increasing scrutiny, and families began to come forward with their own stories of mistreatment. I watched as the man I had once viewed as a respected member of the community began to unravel, but with each passing moment, I felt the weight of my decision pressing down on me. The thrill of revenge was dulled by the realization that I was in over my head. I had ignited a fire, and now I was left to watch it consume everything in its path, including my marriage. And yet, I couldn't turn back. I had committed to this path, and I would see it through to the end. The chaos that had erupted in the wake of my actions was like a storm that refused to dissipate. Each day, I watched as Derek's world crumbled around him. His funeral home, once a pillar of the community, was now the epicenter of scandal and outrage. Families were coming forward with their grievances, and the local news was covering every detail, feeding the public's insatiable curiosity. But amidst the chaos, I felt a growing sense of unease. I had unleashed something far beyond my control, and now the reverberations were beginning to affect my own life in ways I hadn't anticipated. Each time I saw Lisa, I was reminded of the betrayal, and the guilt of my actions weighed heavily on me. I had become a puppet master, pulling strings, but I was starting to feel like a puppet myself, caught in a tangled web of deceit. One evening, as I sat on the couch scrolling through the latest news articles, Lisa came into the living room with a concerned look on her face. "Have you heard from Derek?" I froze, my heart racing. "No, why would I? I don't know. I feel like something's brewing. People are talking and I can't help but worry." I forced a laugh, trying to dismiss her concerns. "It's just business. He's getting what he deserves." "Still, it feels like it's getting personal," she said, crossing her arms. "I just want to make sure you're okay." I nodded, but inside I was anything but okay. I was trapped in a storm of my own making, and the winds were beginning to shift. I had put everything on the line, not just for revenge, but for a sense of justice. Yet, as Derek's reputation plummeted, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was becoming the villain in this story. As the days turned into weeks, the pressure mounted. Derek had gone underground, and whispers of his legal response circulated within the community. He was preparing to fight back, and I knew it was only a matter of time before he discovered my involvement. I had to be careful. I had to stay one step ahead. The tension at home was palpable. Lisa, though still unaware of my role in the unfolding drama, was increasingly anxious. The once warm atmosphere in our home had turned cold, and I felt the distance between us growing. I couldn't bring myself to tell her the truth, to admit that I had orchestrated Derek's downfall. I was afraid of what that would mean for our marriage, for the life we had built together. One night, as I lay in bed next to her, I felt the weight of my decisions bearing down on me. I stared at the ceiling, replaying the events that had led me to this point. I had wanted revenge, but at what cost? I had become a man consumed by anger and betrayal, and in doing so, I had lost sight of who I was. The following day, I received an unexpected call. It was the journalist, his tone urgent. "We need to meet. Derek's lawyer is making threats and he's digging for information. You need to be careful." A chill ran down my spine. "What kind of threats?" "He's claiming that he knows someone leaked information and he's determined to find out who it is. If he connects the dots back to you, it could get ugly." My heart raced as I processed the implications. I had to act quickly. I needed to protect myself before Derek had the chance to retaliate. I suggested we meet in a public place somewhere safe. When we met, I could see the concern etched on the journalist's face. You need to lay low. If Derek is serious about pursuing this, he won't stop until he finds out who's behind the leaks. I can't just disappear, I replied, my voice tinged with desperation. I have to see this through. Revenge can blind you, my friend. You need to think about your future, not just your anger. His words resonated with me, but I was too far gone. I had set this plan in motion, and I couldn't let Derek win. I had a fire in my belly that wouldn't be extinguished. As I drove home, I felt the weight of the world on my shoulders. I was playing a dangerous game, and I was running out of time. I had to make a decision, either continue down this path of revenge or find a way to extricate myself before it was too late. That evening, Lisa confronted me again. You've been distant lately. What's going on? I can't shake this feeling that you're hiding something from me. I could see the concern in her eyes, and it pierced through the armor I had built around my heart. I'm just stressed with work, I lied, forcing a smile. It's been a busy time. She studied me, her brow furrowing. You're not being honest with me, I can feel it. I felt a pang of guilt wash over me. I wanted to tell her everything, to unburden myself, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. I was afraid of what it would mean for our marriage, afraid of losing her if she knew the truth. Really, I'm fine, I insisted, but the words felt hollow. As the days turned into a blur of anxiety, I felt the noose tightening around my neck. I had become a man driven by revenge, but now I was faced with the reality of my actions. I had to decide whether to fight back or to back down. And then, just as I was grappling with my choices, I received a text from an unknown number. We need to talk. Meet me at the old diner at 7 p.m. My heart raced. Was it Derek? Had he figured it out? I had to go. I had to face whatever consequences awaited me. As I prepared to leave, I glanced at Lisa, who was sitting on the couch, lost in her thoughts. I wanted to tell her everything, to confide in her, but I couldn't. I was trapped in a web of lies, and I was about to step into the lion's den. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come. The stakes had never been higher, and I knew that the next few hours would determine the course of my life. As I drove to the old diner, my mind raced with possibilities. The familiar neon lights flickered in the distance, casting an eerie glow over the cracked pavement. I felt like a character in a noir film, caught in a web of deceit and betrayal. The stakes had never been higher, and I was about to confront the consequences of my actions. Arriving at the diner, I parked in the shadowy lot and stepped inside. The smell of greasy food and stale coffee filled the air, and the low murmur of conversations created an atmosphere thick with tension. I scanned the room, my heart pounding as I searched for the figure I was supposed to meet. Then I saw him, Derek, sitting alone in a booth at the far end, his expression unreadable. He looked like the ghost of the man I once thought I knew. The confident facade was gone, replaced by a weary vulnerability that I hadn't expected. I approached cautiously, my heart racing with a mix of fear and adrenaline. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice steady, though inside I felt like I was about to unravel. He looked up, his eyes dark and tired. "I wanted to talk about everything that's been happening." I slid into the booth across from him, my defenses up. "You're the one who's been making headlines. What's there to talk about?" His jaw tightened, and I could see the anger simmering just below the surface. "I know you're behind the leaks. You think you can destroy me and get away with it." I met his gaze, feeling a surge of defiance. "You brought this on yourself. You had an affair with my wife. You think I'm just going to let that slide?" He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I get that you're angry. You have every right to be, but do you really think this is the solution? You're not just hurting me, you're hurting a lot of people, families who trusted me, my employees, my reputation." I leaned back, crossing my arms. "And what about my trust? What about my marriage? You think your actions don't have consequences?" For a moment, we sat in silence, the weight of our shared animosity filling the space between us. Derek's gaze softened slightly, and I could see the flicker of remorse in his eyes. "I never meant for it to go this far. It was a mistake, a stupid mistake, but you're risking everything for revenge. Is it worth it?" His words pierced through my anger, forcing me to confront the truth I had been avoiding. I had become so consumed by vengeance that I had lost sight of everything else: my marriage, my integrity, my own happiness. Maybe it is, I replied, though my voice lacked conviction. Maybe it's the only way to make sure you understand the damage you've caused. Derek leaned forward, desperation etched on his face. What if we could come to an understanding? I can't change what happened, but I can make amends. I can help you with this. Let's put an end to this madness before it gets worse for both of us. I hesitated, weighing his words. The idea of reconciliation, a truce of sorts, felt foreign, but the thought of dragging Lisa deeper into this mess made my stomach churn. What do you propose? I asked cautiously, curiosity tinged with skepticism. I'll publicly admit my wrongdoing, take responsibility for my actions. I'll make sure the families I've hurt are compensated. You can be the one to tell your side of the story without destroying me completely. We can both walk away from this. I considered his offer, feeling the weight of my anger begin to lighten. Maybe revenge wasn't the answer. Maybe forgiveness, or at least a willingness to move on, could offer a path to healing. Why should I trust you? I asked, my voice low but steady. Because I'm just as human as you are. I made a mistake and I'm willing to face the consequences. But I don't want to lose everything because of it. Let's make this right for both our sakes. I felt the walls I had built around myself begin to crumble. Derek was right. Revenge would only lead to more pain, and I didn't want to be that man anymore. I wanted to reclaim my life, to find a way to heal, not just for myself but for Lisa as well. Okay, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Let's talk to the journalist together. Let's set things straight. Derek nodded, relief washing over his features. Thank you. I know this isn't easy, but it's the right thing to do. We spent the next hour discussing the details of how we would approach the journalist and what our statements would entail. As we mapped out our plan, I felt a sense of clarity begin to emerge. This was a chance to take control of my life again, to stop being a pawn in a game of revenge. When I finally left the diner, I felt lighter. The weight of my anger had lifted, replaced by a cautious sense of hope. I had faced the man who had betrayed me, and in doing so, I had found a way to reclaim my own integrity. That evening, I returned home to find Lisa waiting for me, her expression a mixture of concern and relief. I was worried about you, she said, her voice softening as I walked through the door. I took a deep breath, ready to face the truth. I need to tell you everything, about Derek, about the affair, and about what I've done. As I sat down and began to explain, I felt a mixture of fear and vulnerability, but I also felt a sense of freedom. I was ready to confront the consequences of my actions, ready to seek forgiveness for the choices I had made. The journey ahead would be difficult, but I was determined to rebuild, not just my marriage, but my own sense of self. I had learned that revenge could consume a man, but the power of honesty and accountability could lead to healing. In that moment, I knew that while the scars of betrayal would take time to heal, I was finally on the path to reclaiming my life. And with that, I took the first step into a new beginning.